Shafi ul Haq from Institute of Business Management, Karachi.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to begin with a quote from George Orwell. He said, "In our age, there is no such thing as keeping out of politics." He goes on to say, politics itself is a mass of lies, evasions, folly, hatred, and schizophrenia. Which brings me to my point. The education, or at least the way some young people are being educated, is often also a mass of lies, evasions, folly, hatred, schizophrenia, and that the two things are related. I am a proud Pakistani citizen. I am reasonably educated, and I am in love with the wonderful people that I've met in the city. But the implication in the educational curriculum that I was being taught suggested that I view these same people with a certain dislike, for we have fought some wars. I thank Ayyar Sahib for having pointed out that this is an implication that has been rejected by the majority of Pakistani students and indeed the Pakistani population. But I would like to say this, that it is not disconnected from politics itself. Sir, to reject the politicization of a party that is trying to impose it on you, you need to have a political understanding yourself. And I believe, as a Pakistani citizen and representing Pakistan up here, that it is a political understanding that has creeped in to the Pakistani student body that has led to the rejection of the imposition of, let's say, extremist elements in the curriculum. So the two things are not at all disconnected. Education is influenced by politics exactly like education influences politics. And the example that I would use is by using the word nationalism. Now, no 6-year-old anywhere in this world will be taught to despise the values of his or her own country. Now, whether you mean nationalism to be an absolutely constructive, positive understanding of constitutional values and democratic institutions, or you mean it to be a blind faith in the supremacy of your country, that's all under the heading of politicization. The rightness or wrongness of the views is not up for debate. It is what society decides.
Following Shafi would be Madhu Purnima Kishwar.
Politicization of education is an unfortunate reality in India today because our political parties have been allowed to spread their tentacles and invaded every domain of our social, economic, cultural, educational, and even religious life. And like AIDS virus, they have destroyed the health and immune system of every single institution that they have invaded. In such a situation of politicization, we really need emergency measures because, as I mentioned at the start, I think our education sector is in deep crisis. Now, political parties do deserve a respectable space in any democracy, provided they stay within their limited domain and not invade every other area of social, political, economic life. In our country, politicians have institutionalized their stranglehold over the education sector because the ruling party in every state has the power to nominate people of its choice and persuasion to governing bodies of colleges, academic and executive councils of universities, who in turn influence and decide appointments of teachers, principals, vice-chancellors, professors, and teachers. Educational institutions have thus become a well-entrenched patronage racket, and merit in such a situation has inevitably taken a backseat. Ideological political affiliation decides your professional advancement and your career prospects rather than merit. The invasion of party politics in our campuses has divided the teaching and student community into warring gangs. No issue, including course content, can be discussed and decided on merit. The party in power decides who will frame the curriculum, who will write textbooks, the ideological line to be towed, and every change of regime leads to big pendulum swings. The course content in such a situation becomes subservient to partisan political agendas, which West Bengal has witnessed in the grossest form in the last several decades. I'm reminded in this context of the time when I was a young, idealistic, starry-eyed lecturer in a Delhi University college, and the college had very stinking bathrooms. No matter how much you tried to persuade the Safai Karamcharis to do their job, they didn't. So I decided to mobilize a group of students, about 30, 40 students, who volunteered to keep the bathrooms clean with their own manual labor, and while I would lead this Safai brigade. And you won't believe it, because the staff association was dominated by, guess who? CPM. And the Karamchari union was also dominated by CPM. They passed resolutions, they've actually physically obstructed us from cleaning toilets, saying this is an assault on the union rights of Karamcharis. Now, in such a situation where student union and teachers union elections are funded, supported and backed openly by political parties, we've seen how politically affiliated teachers unions ensure that no action can be taken against teachers who don't or can't teach and yet keep drawing full salaries. Absenteeism of teachers in our schools and colleges is a serious menace, and nobody dares take action. In my own college, we saw a teacher openly leak question papers for money, and the Delhi University Teachers Union fought a big battle to have him reinstated because he was suspended for that impropriety. Similarly, politically affiliated students' unions convert perfectly normal young men and women into hooligans and professional hoodlums for whom burning buses is a heroic sport. And I really believe that the manner in which students are actually prevented from engaging with academic issues of improvement of curriculum, improvement of facilities, because they are constantly drawn into national political battles, I really believe that's one of the major reasons for the fact that we are producing unemployable graduates, we are producing PhDs who can't write 4 correct sentences in any language of the world, including their mother tongue. We are producing engineers who really can't find jobs and are not worth getting jobs. It's a very serious crisis that we're facing today.
We come to the concluding speaker of the proposition, which is Yashvi.
First, that there is this intrinsic link between politics and education. Second, the role that education plays in our lives today. And third, the political agenda and a political choice which will necessarily be made. And the moment these educational policies are being formulated for a sector that a government has so much interest in, for a sector that the government is providing so much to, the government or the state will necessarily seek to politicize it, because what does the political party need to do? It needs to propagate its ideology. It needs to propagate its agenda. And what is the best target audience for the propagation of their agenda and their ideology? It is the students, ladies and gentlemen, which brings me to my second constructive of the role of education, right? The role of education today has become vast. It is not limited to teaching students math and science and telling them that 2 plus 2 is 4. The role of education has become so vast so as to include a major interdisciplinary approach to education. The moment that happens, and the moment education moves beyond the horizons of math and science and includes stuff like value education, character building, people's political thoughts being created, that is what education caters to. The moment education caters to something like that, the state will step in and the state will ensure that the education that the students are receiving is something that caters to the state's own interests, that the state's own policies, that the state's own ideology is being propagated. What happened in Nazi Germany? What tool of propagating their policies did Hitler use? He used education to and he started at the grassroots level. That is where politicians and political parties seek to start. If you look at a major example in India, where the Delhi University, when the Congress was in power, they propagated this entire idea about a 4-year undergraduate program, which was massively opposed by the BJP government, which came on later. Why did they do that? Do you think their only agenda was education? It was also to gain political traction, which I tell you, which we on Side Proposition tell you, is also a very important thing which is associated with political parties, which is to gain political traction. And how do they do this? By putting in your history books, by putting in our political science books their own narrative. The state's narrative is what comes forth. And the best example to this is what happened in Japan, right? The entire controversy of Japan modifying the history, because no state wants to tell the world what atrocities it committed on a particular state. They will always want to whitewash their history. They will always want to paint the picture that suits them best. And that is something which is inevitable. And that is something we tell you is always going to happen. More importantly, education is also reflective of the state's ideology or the state's belief. For instance, if France wants to have educations which are not institutions which are not religious in nature, it is doing so because it wants to tell the world that it is following a secular policy, right? That it is a secular country. And the moment France wants to do so, where will it start? It will start with its educational institutions and ensure that they are not religious in nature, because that is the kind of ideology, that is the kind of belief that the country in the first place would want to provide to the world over. And more importantly, to the people in their country, because A, they want to gain political traction, and B, they want their students to know what their ideology is and to perpetuate and propagate it as much as they can.
Ashok winds up the formal round of speaking for the opposition.
If the British government is rewriting history books, it is this education between the lines that will interrogate that effort, more so in the postmodern era of Rollo Barthes, who said that the author is dead, that every author is actually a tissue of quotations. And with the internet being prevalent, it is not so easy to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. So our contention from this side of the floor is, firstly, that the proposition, which is a gross generalization, is also pessimistic, cynical, and totally ignorant of the general populace, the mass, and those who will be educated. Do you think that the students will just sit back and allow this kind of politicization? It didn't happen in Sorbonne 68. You mentioned the film Dialogue and Delirium, which was my second film, but my first film was called Return to Zero, Shunno Theke Shuru, and I dealt with this problem at that stage, that there was a student body, and that student body combined with senior filmmakers like Jean-Luc Godard, who made films like La Chinoise, you know, and there was a concerted movement to protest and move against any kind of politicization. Scott mentioned very clearly that there is a difference between politics and politicization. Politics is very much within the ambit of education, because education has an administrative aspect to it. It also has, as the last speaker rightly pointed out, the aspect of value education, you know, of values, morality. What politicization can totally snuff out the humanity that you have? It is the human spirit which makes education not a fossil. Education is a dynamic concept, changing at every moment. If the forces that be pressurize you into writing a kind of curriculum, there will be a time when education will wriggle out of that. Education is much bigger, as Scott pointed out, than politics. But politicization is something different. There are institutions that are not politicized, and there is no theoretical basis to the motion which says that politicization of education is inevitable. Now, I would like to say from our side, firstly, that because education is much bigger, because there is a non-formal aspect to education, because there is a holistic aspect to education, because there is a moral side to education, you can always stand up and take a stance and oppose. And it's not just the students or the teachers who will oppose. Why not Mr. Iyer, who led from our side? Why not the politicians themselves? Why do we always think that the politicians will have insidious intent? Why do we have to always crucify the politicians? They